Hello, and welcome to the 12th class on David. Let's start again with a quick review. David lived life with real people, including those who tried to push their own agenda rather than God's, even using violence and exploitation to reach their goals. Yet God continues to work the circumstances to accomplish his goals. Now, we left David bemoaning the fact that he had to deal with knuckleheads in his family and in his administration. The next incident reminds David the knuckleheads weren't confined to the southern kingdom of Judah. Seeking to gain favor with David, now that Abner, the Norse commander-in-chief, is dead, two men from the northern tribe of Benjamin assassinate Ishbosheth, the king of the northern country of Israel. Now Rechab and Baanah sent out for the house of Ishbosheth, and they arrived there in the heat of the day while he was taking his noonday rest. They went into the inner part of the house as if to get some wheat. They'd gone into the house while he was lying on the bed in his bedroom. After they stabbed and killed him, they cut off his head. Taking it with them, they traveled all night. They brought the head of Ishbosheth to David and said to the king, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, your enemy, who tried to kill you. This day the Lord has avenged my lord the king against Saul and his offspring." Rechab and Baanah hoped to be rewarded for delivering the northern kingdom to David. They faced quite a different fate. David answered Rechab and Baanah, "As surely as the Lord lives, when someone told me Saul is dead and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and put him to death. That was the reward I gave him. How much more, when wicked men have killed an innocent man in his own house and on his own bed, should I not now demand his blood from your hand and rid the earth of you?" So David gave him an order to his men, and they killed them. They cut off their hands and feet and hung the bodies by the pool in Hebron, but they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in Abner's tomb. Now, with the exception of one of Saul's grandsons, who was physically disabled and therefore prevented from ascending to the throne, Saul's lineage has died out. The leaders of the north now turn to David. When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. With this move, David now rules over both the north and the south. Let's step back a moment and assess one of David's most pressing problems: unity between the north and the south. Recognizing this, David understands he needs a new capital, not Hebron in the south or Mahanaim in the north, but a neutral one, like Washington, D.C. David turns his eyes to the Jebusite city that's located on the border between the north and the south, Jerusalem. The king and his men marched to Jerusalem to attack the Jebusites who lived there. Jerusalem is located on a plateau, which made it easier to defend. It also had water from the Gihon spring piped into the city so that Jerusalem could withstand a long siege. The Jebusite leaders were quite sure of their safety. The Jebusites said to David, "You will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off." They thought, David cannot get in here. Now, it's hard to know exactly what the Jebusites' taunt meant, whether it was that Jerusalem was so invincible that it could be defended by the blind and the lame, or whether the Jebusites would fight to the last man, including the blind and the lame, to defend themselves. Biblical scholars aren't exactly sure. Either way, David took them up on their challenge. On that day, David had said, "Anyone who conquers the Jebusites will have to use the water shaft to breach those lame and blind who are David's enemies. That is why they say, 'The blind and lame will not enter the palace.'" David apparently knew of the water shaft, and some scholars suggest David directed his men to climb it up to breach the city. Once inside the city walls, David and his men were able to capture Jerusalem. From that time on, the blind and the lame were excluded from the temple until the time of Jesus. David then took up residence in the fortress and called it the City of David. At this point, Jerusalem is now known as the City of David, the capital of the United Kingdom under David's reign. Now that he held power, would David change with his circumstances? Would he become a despot, or would he continue to grow? And David became more and more powerful because the Lord God Almighty was with him. Another way to translate this verse is David proceeded from then with a longer stride and a larger embrace. The change in David's life is radical. He's moved from the margin of power to the center, from living life in the wilderness as a fugitive to living as royalty, from being on the defensive to being in command. I would argue that David's story is a story of growth and of change. David wasn't embittered by Saul's treatment of him. He grew. He wasn't obsessed with his Philistine enemies. He became more experienced. He didn't worry about guarding his self-centered interests. He became more responsible. He didn't become lazy and try to live off the reputation of his youth. He matured. He chose not to be sidetracked by the trappings of power. He continued to look forward. Change in our life is often feared. We're worried that change will diminish us, to make us feel left behind as we grow older. We're afraid change could cut us off from our roots or our past, where we felt comfortable and in control. When you look at your life, what would you say were the best years? Are they in front of you, or were your best years when you were a child or in high school or in college? Change can be a catalyst for growth. It stimulates development, encouraging us to become more, to deepen our relationships, to lengthen our reach, to enlarge our lives. David lengthened his stride. He did the unexpected. He conquered a city that was considered unconquerable. He confronted his enemies and the unknown. He grew into his calling. David also enlarged his embrace. He included more and more people under his rule. He learned the lesson of generosity and extended it to the northern tribes who initially rejected him. He didn't use his position or strength to destroy, but to invite and to lead. When we grow and mature, we lengthen our stride by serving more and enlarge our embrace by loving more. Our culture is overflowing with change, but we don't do growth very well. We're attracted to the newest, the flashiest, the most talked about. Think of the buzz the release of a new iPhone or game or movie causes. Often, instead of integrating a new device or development or opportunity, we replace what we had before. We become bored easily and look for the next new thing. But people who are distracted by finding the newest thing can actually struggle to mature. They're always on the lookout for the next new partner, the next new job, the next new fad. In contrast, God's way is the way of growth. We read in Jeremiah, this is what the Lord says, "Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls." Our past isn't discarded, but integrated into who we are becoming. Deeper reflection helps drive growth. We need to stand, look, ask, walk, rest. Look at David's life of growth. He was anointed king as a teen, then he killed Goliath and spent time as a musician in Saul's court. When he was about 20 years old, he spent 8 years as a fugitive from Saul in the wilderness. At 28, he was leading a guerrilla band of 600 men at Ziklag. He had turned 30 when he was crowned king of the southern tribes of Judah and spent 7.5 years before he was accepted as king of the northern tribes of Israel, finally uniting the country. David was more at 38 than he was at 18. He was more who God created him to be. Throughout this whole time, God is shaping David, giving him opportunities to grow and to mature. God rarely microwaves mature followers. When we understand and accept that, we understand that Christian growth and faith is really similar. The Christian life starts from a seed and becomes a plant that bears fruit. The Christian life isn't a how-to book you read, a YouTube video you watch, or life supplied by IKEA where you insert part A into part B. A Christian is something we become as God works in us and as we practice this way of life, sometimes falling down and a few times getting it right. David's story teaches us that life with God means to stay alert, to stay honest, and to stay humble. It's asking, where is God moving and what is God blessing so I can join him there? This is what the leaders reminded David. And the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler. The words the leaders from the north use are really important. In the Hebrew text, they ask David to be a prince, not a king. They reiterate the fact that God is king, and David must remain subordinate to him. A prince is an apprentice to the king. He emerges from the ranks as he matures, then finally to lead. David has risen from the ranks. He developed his faith and his leadership with his people. He's not an outsider imposed upon the people. The leaders also remind David he's to be a shepherd. A shepherd lives with his flock and cares for it. The leaders want David to keep that continuity with his past and to keep the heart of a shepherd. Essentially, the people want David to remember his humble boyhood in Bethlehem and his generous leadership at Ziklag. In this charge to David, we hear echoes of the beloved Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. For David, God's not an abstract concept, but a concrete reality he can point to. Like David, when we let God into our lives, we change. Even better, we grow. From here, the story shifts. The rise of David is done, and the reign of David begins. Some important takeaways. What we experience with God is meant not to just change us, but to mature us. The Christian life isn't something we learn about, but something we grow into. And when we grow, we serve more and we love more. Now, I'd encourage you to check out the discussion guide, which also includes study suggestions and other activities. Thanks for joining us. Next time, we'll find out if David will use religion to keep God in a box. Until then, keep the faith.